Hi, welcome everyone to PopCultX episode 68. Here on PopCultX, where we discuss everything pop culture with Danny and Gabriel, two Gen X guys that like to watch movies, talk about music, read comic books, all of those things. So welcome to this week's episode. We'll go in and get started. Danny, what's going on?
Not too much. I mean, like you said, I read a few comic books. I listened to some new music, watched a few movies, and watched a few shows. So, pop culture, I got my fill in this past week. I'll get to my standouts, which I really enjoyed, and it kind of leads into what we're talking about a little bit later on in the episode. But how about yourself? What did you get up to?
So I saw a new show on Netflix, and I tweeted you about it. Those of our listeners who follow us on Twitter, Darko Danny and Loud Brown and Proud. I mentioned that there was a couple things that came out this week or this past week.
Mm-hmm.
One of them I chose to watch, which was the Sandman series on Netflix. So that kind of brings the television series and comic book world together. Sandman is famously, a series of graphic novels, comic books created by Neil Gaiman. And it is a series based about this fantasy world. You have multiple different characters, Dream, you have Death, you have Cain and Abel, you have Lucifer. So really fantasy rich storyline. So I saw the first two episodes.
Oh, okay. I saw the first one.
Yeah, the first one. So we'll go ahead and stick to the first one so I can get your thoughts. But the first one, my first reaction was that the casting is incredible. They got Tom Sturridge to play Dream, who is like the main character, and it's like the comic book come to life when you look at him.
Okay.
He's exactly like Dream, and it's such a good show. I mean, I read the comic a couple of years ago, and it's really interesting to see how it's been brought to life. Some of the unique casting decisions that they've made. The storyline is really great. For those that haven't seen the first episode, I don't want to give away a lot because I think that coming into it not knowing what to expect might be very interesting and intriguing for some people. People who have already read the comics know what's really going on, and I think they're going to view it in a different way. But being that you are one of those people that haven't read the novel, what were your thoughts about the first episode?
You're right.
Reaction.
I came into it not knowing anything about it. I mean, I know I've heard of it because I'm a fan of Neil Gaiman and some of his other work. But I hadn't read any of the graphic novels, so I didn't know other than what we had briefly discussed leading up to this being released on Netflix. And I watched the first episode, and it was interesting. I mean, I could totally see how it drew from a graphic novel because it had the elements of that I would expect in a graphic novel. But it was a little slow to begin with. I don't know if I'm just expecting action. And because this wasn't that in the first episode, at least it was a little bit slow. I mean, I think Dream, give away as much as you want. They've already released all 10 episodes, right? So it doesn't really matter. People haven't seen it. Too bad. Pause. Don't listen. What I was going to say is I can't believe Dream spent like the first episode basically in a bubble jail. Yeah. Right. And he didn't say anything, didn't have any lines. He had great facial expressions and his eyes did all the talking for him. But it was like, okay, here's your main character of this episode of Legend. All he does is just sit there naked in a bubble, which is interesting choice. I mean, I don't know if how closely that follows to the graphic novel, but it was cool. I mean, I did enjoy the whole ritual around it because I thought that was really cool, really dark, really eyes wide shut in a way type of thing. Yeah. The whole sickness, the sleep sickness, whatever they called it, that was really cool. It was good. I'm gonna get into episode 2 soon and see where it goes from that. I really did like the dream world, and that when it came back at the end, it was all destroyed and everything, and he had to go rebuild it. So I thought I really like where they're building to, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I think that one of the really cool things for me was how they discuss the way in which dreams motivate man or humanity,
Mm-hmm.
humankind to
Mm-hmm.
do things, that there is this alternate reality in this dream world.
Yeah,
It
true.
really shapes us and defines us. And it's kind of, it kind of makes your head kind of open up and your perspective open to like, yeah, dreams do and nightmares really do influence
Mm-hmm.
your life and the way you live, because you do have fears, you have phobias, you have
Yeah,
things
that's
you
true.
aspire to, and it's a really interesting take, especially to have it discussed or created within a comic book. It's definitely not like an MCU style
No, yeah.
or Disney Plus style show. So if you're expecting, oh hey, it's based on a comic book, I want to come in and see, you know, Thor or Hawkeye or whatever. That's not it. That's not, it's
Mm-hmm.
creating a new world of fantasy. I'm not a
Yeah.
really big fantasy fan. Like I don't like Harry Potter. I don't like Game of Thrones. But I'm a fan of the way that world kind of mixes with the world that we know, and
Mm-hmm.
how it takes like really iconic characters like Death and how it's modernized and then created. So I think it's cool. I think that the first episode, I could see how you would think maybe it's a little bit on the slower end, but it was just a really rich looking show. It looks like
Yeah.
they spent a lot of money. The sets, the design, the
Mm-hmm.
characters, the development of where this is going to lead, just looks really cool. I was really impressed by that, because it could end up looking like a WB, Arrow, or what are Supergirl, one of those where it's like the special effects are kind of low budget and it
Mm-hmm.
looks like crap. We definitely, Disney Plus has raised the stakes and the production value when it comes to comic book series on television now. So I think that it's still within that line of bringing really great production. But I'm really excited to see where the show goes and introducing one of the characters. One in particular that I'm really looking forward to is Lucifer, which is going to be played by a female actress by the name of Gwendolyn Christie. She's known as a character from Game of Thrones and also Captain Phasma in Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Oh, okay.
She's, a 6'3"
Mm-hmm.
blonde,
Yeah.
Amazon. And I think it's really cool that they chose a woman to portray Lucifer, fallen angel and all of that biblical, reference. And to see that come to life in that way from that actress, I think is going to be really interesting. It reminds me of how they chose Tilda Swinton to play. I think she played Gabriel, the archangel,
Yeah.
but in an
In
evil way
Constantine.
in Constantine,
Mm-hmm.
who is a spinoff of Sandman. So
Right.
if you didn't know that, he comes from this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of interesting that when they do that, they swap genders. And it really, does an angel or the devil have a gender? No, at least from my perspective. So I think it's kind of cool that they have women playing those characters. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I am as well, only because I think what you said, it looks visually stunning. Now, I watched the trailer and I saw some of the cinematography and shots that they had in the trailer. So I was waiting for that sort of scope in episode 1. And I got a little bit of it toward the end, but that's what I'm really looking forward to, is that visual, just like, wow. And I think we're going to get, I'm sure we're going to get it because it's in the trailer, but I'm excited about it.
Yeah, cool. So I was watching one of the options. I think that I had mentioned to you on Twitter that a horror movie called They Them also came out on Peacock, and then on Hulu, a new version of Predator by the name of Prey came out. And which option did you choose to watch? I already know.
If you follow my Twitter feed, you know that I watched Prey. It is a spinoff of Predator. It takes place in the early 1700s when supposedly the first Predator visited Earth. Think about this. You can go back and say, and have the filmmakers could make a Predator alien visit early Egyptians, right? So it could go anywhere. But this is currently what they have, is the first visitation of the Predator alien. I forgot the actual race name. I know they say it somewhere, so don't get mad at me. But it was fantastic. I'm not a huge Predator fan. I've watched maybe the Arnold Schwarzenegger version and the most recent before this one, the Predator version. So, and I saw parts of Predator 2. So I'm not the biggest fan of it, but this one really grabbed my attention from the beginning and held it. I mean, the lead actress, Amber Midthunder, she was great. She's going to be a star. She was fantastic. The actor who played her brother in the movie, Dakota Beavers, he was great as well. And I don't think he's getting enough, not getting talked about enough as she is, but they were both fantastic. I read that they both did the majority of their own stunts, which was really cool. They went through like some boot camp to make sure that they could do the physicality of everything that was asked of them, but that was more closely tied to how the natives at that time would have fired a bow and arrow, would have ridden their horses. So they went through like a 3-month boot camp to get ready for this role. And that was just cool. I mean, the way it was shot, the director, Dan Trachtenberg, I think his name is, he just did a great job. The whole movie was just great. It was shot wonderfully. I think it was shot in Canada, but it was just beautiful landscape and scenery. So 5 stars for me.
Nice. Yeah. The reception of this, from what I hear, is great, that the fans are really rating it very high. There are 2 options available, right? That you can watch it in English and then also dubbed in the Comanche language.
Right. Which is really cool because the actors, same actors went back and did the whole movie again, the audio portion in Comanche language, because, that's what they spoke. So some parts are in Comanche in the English version, but then you have the option of going back and watching the whole thing in Comanche, which I'm going to do. Haven't done it yet, but I plan on it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of watching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon in Chinese. Like, it just seemed so much better than in English dub. But again, I haven't seen it, but the reception of it has been amazing. There's a lot of talk of Amber Midthunder and Dakota Beavers possibly joining the MCU. A lot of fans are like, hey, this would be great to see some Indigenous actors join the MCU. Talk of her being one of the New Mutants, Danielle Moonstar or Mirage, or possibly play X-23, Wolverine, in the X-Men. There's a couple of Indigenous X-Men characters that they could play. I would be so down for that. I think that we do need Indigenous people represented in the MCU. That's what I love about the X-Men so much. And here I go on this tangent, but the X-Men are so diverse that it's not forcing, because how there's that whole controversy of like, forced diversity in films or within superhero. Like, the X-Men have always been very diverse. So let's bring let's not focus on Cyclops and Jean Grey. Like, they did that. They did Dark Phoenix like twice. Let's bring in some of the other cool characters that we haven't seen yet, like Warpath, or like I said, Danny Moonstar. That would be just really cool to bring them into. And, now that we're going into the X-Men being introduced into the MCU, they can do some really cool things that, maybe wouldn't be what you expect, which would be the rehashing of the last, 6 movies that we've already seen with the X-Men, and start not with Cyclops, Beast, Iceman, and Jean Grey, like start with the second wave of X-Men, which I would really welcome. I think it would be a really cool idea to do it that way.
That'd be really cool. I mean, I think Marvel fandom is going to have to fight with Star Wars fandom, because I think Star Wars fandom is asking for Amber Midthunder to be written into the Star Wars kingdom or galaxy somewhere. So either she's going to have a mutants or she's going to have a lightsaber, one of the two, but she's going to be somewhere. Her future is so bright. Well, and deservedly so. But yeah, I could see how she could be one of the X-Men easily.
Yeah, I really hope so, because we do see oftentimes, especially with people of color, is that they get a role that they really shine in, and everyone is like, oh, wow, they're really talented. They're going to be, really big. And then the spotlight kind of moves away from them. And then Hollywood's like, okay, well, that's not hot anymore. We're going to go invest in someone else. And it's unfortunate, because like, they don't get the same opportunity as like a Kevin Costner who's had the opportunity to make stuff over and over again. And let's give them the opportunity to like make more than one film, more than one show. There's a ton of actors that, I could think of that had like a really breakout moment, like Precious, the actress, Gabby Sidibe, or I think that's her name. How, it was really big, a lot of attention for playing Precious in that movie. She's nominated, and then she went on to American Horror Story, and then the spotlight moves on to someone else who's, hot at the moment. And it's like, let's keep the attention on them. Let's keep giving them good, work.
Yeah. Let's talk about something real quick since you brought that up. And this really made me mad, and it was a hot topic, still is. Let's talk about Leslie Grace and Batgirl being canned at Warner Brothers, which I think is the stupidest thing ever. And they talk about the spotlight moving. Hers should still be shining. She was fantastic in The Heights. And from what I've read and heard, she did a fantastic, great job in Batgirl. It sucks that the executives decided to use it as a tax break to recoup money. It's just a asinine, horrible thing to do to all those creatives that spent their time, energy, blood, sweat, tears, probably making this film, to just have it sit on a shelf. Yeah, it's just made me so mad. And I think if you want to get someone else into the MCU, there's another star we should bring in, Leslie Grace, bring her into the MCU and give her a role in the X-Men or whatnot.
Yeah, DC is really dropping the ball. Like, I'm really disappointed in them. There have been some good films like Wonder Woman, the original. Zack Snyder's Justice League I really enjoyed. But to know that, I think they even admitted that there's like a Cyborg movie that they filmed really? And just to see how they're ruining this opportunity to bring such great content to the screen. Batgirl obviously being the topic of of the week, last 2 weeks. It's just really unfortunate. She's a really talented actress. Brendan Fraser was going to be playing the villain or one of the villains in the show, and everyone is really hungry to see more work by him. He hasn't really been in the spotlight in a while, so everyone was just like, "What? You had Brendan Fraser coming back?" So it's just
really, Michael Keaton too, I think, was going to be in there. Keaton
getting hit back in the role of Batman. So just a real big blunder. One of the other things that was kind of sad to see is how so much vitriol and hatred was being spewed towards Leslie Grace. Just people just being mean-spirited, and it just Twitter is like such a weird thing. It's like it has its good moments where you can communicate and connect with people that are like-minded, or even have a conversation with someone that has a differing opinion. But then there's just like garbage people that are on there that are like harassing an actress that has nothing to do with whatever you're upset about. Like, she took a role. She's, probably living a childhood dream to be a superhero character, and you're making fun of her. I don't know why. So I just, my heart goes out to her that she moves on to bigger and better things. Hopefully we can see her as a superhero, because that'd be really cool. But if not, we'll see her in another role that probably is just as great and be able to show off her talents, because she is a really talented young woman.
Yeah. And DC, like you said, they've just been crap in the bed, so to speak. I mean, they're still planning on releasing The Flash in the theaters, even after the lead actor, Ezra Miller, even after they got a warrant out for a felony burglary, and they're still riding on that hill. They're going to go forward with it. That just boggles my mind.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the decisions that they're making at DC. Like, I'm shocked. One thing that they have, I think, is out in the Twitterverse that is in discussion is that they might be bringing Henry Cavill to play Superman.
Oh, really?
That's the only smart thing that I've heard. Executive. To me, he's Superman. Like, he's my favorite Superman of all time. I am I think they've already announced that they're going to be working with Ben Affleck as Batman again, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Batman will be Ben Affleck. I think did a great job. He's not necessarily my favorite Batman, But he's really cool in Batman.
Well, yeah,
And so
he played the broken, beaten down Batman, right? So
yeah, and then you have Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, who I think they can still salvage a Justice League film, or reuniting those three powerhouses together. I'd really still like to see that.
mhm.
And then Aquaman as well. We know we're getting a sequel with him, and I think that he's done really well with that role.
Yeah,
Jason
Momoa.
Momoa. So there's still hope. I mean, maybe not the Flash, maybe exit the Flash and bring in Martian Manhunter, or someone else that's part of the Justice League, and we can kind of go from there. But that's the only thing that I've heard that's exciting coming out of DC camp, is that Henry Cavill will be coming back.
That's
So I'm
cool.
happy about that.
That's cool. I mean, I don't think I have an opinion on Superman one way or the other. The actor who's playing him, I don't know. It just hasn't really resonated with me. I mean, I still hearken to Christopher Reeves as my Superman, because that's the one I came on with. We just got finished talking about movies and stuff, and I was just gonna mention, actually, everyone. So on Twitter, I was raving about the Interrupters' new album, In the Wild, which is just a fantastic album. I've listened to it probably 3 or 4 times already. It's just great. And I was tweeting about that and reading up on different tweets, and I came across Wall of Sound, which is where we're lucky enough to be joined by the co-editor of Wall of Sound, and that is Ricky Aarons. Hello, Ricky. Thanks for taking some time today and stopping by PopCultX.
Thanks so much, and thanks so much for having me today, guys.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. Now, you are a self-proclaimed deathcore connoisseur. That's what it has in your bio. That's what I'm reading there. What does that mean?
To the average eye, that just sounds like a whole bunch of words bunched up together, doesn't it?
A little bit.
All right, so I'm going to give this a crack, and I'm going to allow the other deathcore heads in my community to slam me for getting it wrong. But basically, in the heavy metal world, there's heaps of subgenres, right?
Yeah.
And the reason for those subgenres is to kind of cater the music to the right eyes and ears. And so without giving you too much of a big heavy metal story, in the last couple of decades, hardcore music came through, and it's sort of a subset of heavy music, heavy metal, if you will. And then, there's a big part of hardcore music which has a breakdown in it, which is basically an instrumental crescendo, which you can catch at the end of or in the midway of many songs that you hear.
Okay.
But then a lot of heavy metal bands started to take those breakdowns and hardcore elements and add them to what is more like a mainstream heavy metal song. And that became metalcore. And so metalcore is probably the biggest, most popular heavy music genre at the moment. And then some of the heavy heads who just need to go a little bit heavier, they just had to be better than everyone else. They then took death metal and added those breakdowns, and now we've got this popular subgenre called deathcore.
Right on. That is really cool. I mean, my experience with like heavy metal music goes back to like probably the 80s, right? So like Metallica, and I didn't even really listen to Metallica, Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath, and stuff like that. So it's not really I'm not up to speed current by any means. So I'm glad you're here to talk to us about, not give us an education or whatnot, but just to talk about your perspective on music, and especially the kind of music you love. Now, you're a music journalist, first and foremost, correct? What got you into music journalism?
Yeah, really good question. So I've always been really, really passionate about music. And I started listening to punk music when I was about 13, 14, and that got heavier into metal and so on. And I was never really much of an instrumentalist, but like I knew I wanted to have a really core role in music somehow. And I found that writing reviews for an album, I just got picked up by, a small Australian publication. And I really liked being able to express myself and share my thoughts on an album. And then, I got a lot of kicks out of that. And all of a sudden I got a chance to interview a band. And I thought, oh, me interview a band? Like, I don't know what I'd say, but all right, cool. Let's give it a crack. And so I interviewed this band called Devil Driver, and they're like, super heavy, heavy metal band. It went really well, and I got a real kick out of it. And I was like, I could do a bit more of this.
Yeah.
And I got given, advanced copies of albums to listen to. so that I could talk about those albums in the interviews. And then I just sort of picked up more and more opportunities to the point where I had this huge bucket list of interviews with bands that I've been dying to do. And I've just been kicking those off.
Nice.
And I love it. I live for it. And I go to heaps of gigs. I review heaps of gigs over here in Melbourne. We jump backstage at a lot of interviews and get to chat to a lot of the bands. And it's just an unreal experience to be able to have that outlet, that creative outlet.
That's really cool. Now, if you weren't aware, everyone out there in our PopCultX listeners, Ricky is from Australia. So he is, I guess you said you're from Melbourne, right? What sort of, I guess I'm harking back to the days before streaming platforms, before Spotify, before Apple Music, Amazon Music, where music might have taken a little bit longer to branch out, right? Have you noticed a change in that at all? And has that been for the benefit, or how has that affected the way you listen to your music?
I was thinking about that question a lot before jumping on this call today. Not that question specifically, but the world of heavy music, or just music today, and how it's changed since records, CDs, even tapes. And, you know, our consumerism around music was at a steady pace, where we would wait for it to sort of hit the stores, and it would need to get advertised, and we might need to hear a couple singles before we bought it, and then we'd finally hear it.
Right.
You know, and then we'd tell our friends about it, and it would slowly get some airtime. Now the streaming world's come in, and the bands and the artists can't keep up with the consumerism. And it's a really interesting dichotomy. And so, you know, I think I read a stat somewhere, you guys might have seen it, where apparently there's a stage where, you know, a person reaches their 30s and their appetite for new music decreases, and they start just playing the same old music that they've heard. Have you heard that before?
Yeah.
That's definitely lived it
right now.
That's you right now?
Yeah, well, we're Gen X, so we're past the 30-year mark. We're in like the 40-year mark. And so one of the things that, you know, Danny and I often talk about is how, you know, high school, college was like our music time, like the music that we really still is like resounding to us, that we still listen to. A lot of the new stuff we listen to kind of harkens back to that sound. So I'm definitely not at all hip or cool or like know what is going on. Deathcore is definitely a new term for me. That's not something that I really know of. I have a friend who's a lot younger than me and probably could rattle off all sort of bands that fall within that category. But I definitely am a Gen Xer for sure.
Well, that's all right, because by the end of this call, you'll be listening to so much deathcore that you'll have satanic imagery all around your house, and, you know.
Nice.
But one of my two observations is this. One is that I think that stat used to be true until the streaming era. So what's happening now is that because we can grab our hands on new music at the minute the clock strikes midnight, and as an aside, this is how Wall of Sound actually thrived, because being in Australia, we joked about this before we came online, but we actually receive new music first in the world, so we report on it first in the world. And so people need new music all the time, because the amount of artists, especially in the heavy metal world, that are releasing new songs and albums every day, week, month, year, is so insane that people feel the need to keep up. And so you actually do the opposite of what the stats used to tell us, which is you probably listen to less of the older stuff that you used to love, because you're just trying to keep up with the new stuff that's coming through, because it's all so good. And there's this big FOMO factor of not wanting to miss out on the current trends of new music.
Yeah, I can see that, definitely.
Yeah.
Especially being on social media and different Twitter and stuff, and you see everyone talking about different albums or different music that comes out, and you want to go be a part of that, like you said, because you don't want to miss out on it. So yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, I signed up for Apple Music just, you know, because I had to have, you know, someplace to get unlimited music. And I've explored so many different genres of music that I've never before, I wouldn't have even thought about. Like, I haven't gotten to deathcore music yet. That comes after this. But I've gotten into a lot of different Spanish music and different other world music, and even some more classical music that I get to explore that maybe wasn't on shuffle on my iPod before. So yeah, I totally agree.
I have a question for you. So you brought up the imagery of death metal or heavy music having satanic imagery and being kind of dark. I'm from San Diego, by the way, and I used to live in a neighborhood where Rob Halford of Judas Priest used to live, and I used to be walking the neighborhood, and I'd see him like drinking a cup of coffee and having like
get out of here.
and he's just like an older, quaint old man, and I've wondered, now that you've interviewed these, people in these like heavy metal bands and you see all their imagery, does it surprise you that like their everyday today life is just like regular guys? Or, I kind of expected him to be drinking blood out of like a chalice with like spikes coming out of his shoulders and leather harnesses. And
it's so funny. It's the biggest misconception around heavy metal that listening to that genre means that you've got this dark personality. I mean, look at this guy, right? And look, sometimes it does. Sometimes people really feel like they want to channel the art of the music into the way they present themselves in terms of the way they dress and the artwork around the house or that kind of thing or whatever it is. But it really is just a form of expression. And I think that heavy metal, because it can be so aggressive and angry and powerful, it's able to channel a lot of, real life issues. And so what I found in more recent years covering a lot of the latest heavy metal is that lyrically, heavy metal bands are covering some really genuine mental health issues, some really big domestic violence issues, and stuff that is actually quite altruistic in trying to share the right message. It's just in a sonic way, it's delivered in a way that helps people express themselves, relate to others, and be able to feel a sense of relief that they're not alone in something. And what you find is that the heavy metal community is actually one of the most unifying genres there is out there in terms of people coming together. And so an example of that is the blind eye might look at a mosh pit at a heavy metal show and see people doing, these circle pits. I don't know if you've seen those before, and it looks like kind of crazy. And you're like, how'd you guys here to enjoy yourselves? Like, what do you kind of crowd kill today? But what you don't see is that when someone falls down, immediately everyone's there to pick them up. And that is the biggest anecdote of heavy metal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So you brought up an issue that is kind of a hot topic for us here in the States. You mentioned the artist talking about or discussing domestic violence. Recently, we had this big Johnny Depp trial. One of the aspects of that was that he's friends with Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson has been accused of a variety of atrocious things within the scene of, as a music journalist or someone who is involved in the music scene. Do you think that we're watching the demise of the band Marilyn Manson or of the individual Marilyn Manson? Is he going to be the new R. Kelly where, he's off to jail and we won't be listening to his music anymore? Or do you think that he has a chance of maybe coming back out with a new album and new music, and will people still support him?
This is the hottest topic at the moment, and it is the realest topic. And whilst it is a big topic in all music, in heavy metal, it exists equally, like you said, Marilyn Manson being one example. And in terms of cancel culture, it is a really interesting time to watch how fans respond, because Marilyn Manson is the kind of figure where there are diehard fans out there. People who live for this guy, they've got memorabilia everywhere. They'll go to every concert around the country when he comes to town, like diehard fans. So it's kind of the whole conversation around separating the art from the artist, which has been talked about a lot and is quite problematic too. So there's an Australian band called North Lane. They're really big over here, and they're big around the world actually as well. They're a metalcore band. And they released a new song called Carbonized. And I interviewed Marcus Brugge, the vocalist, a little while ago and talked about the song, and I asked him what it was about. And he said it was about cancel culture and how a lot of people are trying to separate the art from the artist. And he sort of talked about it as a bunch of bullshit, because people are trying to make excuses to be able to listen to music they love because it's inconvenient to them to have to deal with some of those realities, like with the Marilyn Manson situation. And it's a very interesting one. You think about Michael Jackson, which is more mainstream. Is he being played at weddings and on the radio? There was another instance with a band called As I Lay Dying in the heavy metal world. Have you heard of them before?
I've heard of them. Yeah.
So there was an incident where the frontman, the vocalist, was charged with attempted assault on his ex-wife in an attempt to kill her. And he did jail time for that. And so the band itself has been supposedly cancelled. And then it's sort of like, well, you got to pick a side around, are you going to continue to listen to their music or are you not? You know, Wall of Sound takes a stance where when we recognize an artist as sort of been proved to do the wrong thing in that regard and any other regard, we make choices as to whether we're going to continue covering those artists or not, because we know that we play a role in that in society and our readers. But to answer your question, it's a very mixed one, because I think people will have different opinions on whether they'll continue listening to the artist or not. I mean, I was in the car with my fiance the other day and we were looking at wedding music because we're getting married soon. And R. Kelly came on. And I said, well, we're not allowed to listen to this anymore. And she's like, oh, but if you listen to before the first 26 seconds, the revenue doesn't go to the artist because you've clicked next.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's where we've gotten to. Did you guys know that?
No, I didn't.
I actually was a fan of R. Kelly's music, and deleted it. I do have Michael Jackson music on my playlist. That's someone that you know, based off of the information that I have, I feel comfortable still listening to his music. I was a big fan of Marilyn Manson. Watching the documentary from Evan Rachel Wood, it was just, I just had such a strong reaction to the outpouring of pain that she had, and it just made me feel uncomfortable to support him even by listening to his music. So you know, I've made that choice. I don't necessarily, you know, go after people and say, oh, you can't listen to, you know, X, Y, or Z person. I think it's a personal choice that people should make. But I think that as a journalist, you know, such as you, that it is something that you have to take very seriously, like giving someone a spotlight and the opportunity to, you know, sell their music, or an opportunity to make money when you know that they're, you know, maybe been convicted of a crime. You know, that's a choice that you have to make as a journalist. So some journalists may feel, you know, hey, I'm reporting the news. It's not up to me. So it's very interesting. Another hot topic that maybe someone wouldn't think that we would bring up to a deathcore expert like yourself, but I'm going to do it, is the recent passing of Olivia Newton-John. That's been a really big topic here in the States. Huge icon for us, especially for Danny and I's generation. We grew up watching, you know, Grease, singing along to Grease, Xanadu. Just a very sweet person. How has the response been for you and the community in which you're in?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's really rocked Australia, to be honest. Not only because she was such a wonderful actor in all of those movies that you mentioned, but she actually did a lot of advocacy and a lot of great things for breast cancer in Australia and around the world, and has been just such an altruist in so much that she did, that as a person, I think Australia was rocked from that perspective. I know that our premier, which is like a mayor, I guess, in the US, is making sure that some of the monuments in Melbourne are lit up tonight to sort of acknowledge Newton-John. And yeah, I think it was a really, really big loss to Australia. And I think that everyone's really feeling that one.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. I think it came across in all her work that she did, that she was a very sweet, sincere person. And I mean, you can't find anyone to say anything negatively about her. So I think it's all her life and her passing has touched a lot of people.
Yeah.
Sorry,
absolutely. It's really nice to hear when that news sort of gets shared around the world and everyone is able to sort of make those tributes. And sometimes, bringing it back to deathcore for a moment, one of the fun parts about heavy music is often bands will do covers of really old school pop songs, and it sounds absolutely amazing. So you should definitely check some of those out.
That's really cool. Now, of course, Olivia Newton-John being from Australian, and yes, I, like Gabe said, grew up with watching Grease a lot. That was like a huge part of my upbringing. I guess my parents put it on and we watched it many, many, many times. Knew the songs, you know, her songs. But it got me thinking, who's really hot right now in Australian music that maybe we haven't heard of yet here in the States? You mentioned one band already. Because like for me, I know like Men at Work, I know Tones and I know a few bands, not too many, but I know more of the actor side of it, right? The more of the Hollywood side of it. So if you were to recommend a band for us, even if it's not within the deathcore metal, heavy metal music that you know about, that you say, these are the next big stars out of Australia, could you pick one band?
Okay, this is an interesting one. So I'm going to try and take my death metal hat off for a second. But I know objectively that there is a band called Gang of Youths, which is an Aussie band that is just jumping wild through the hoops, so to speak. And a lot of these bands get voted for in something called the Triple J Hottest 100. Have you heard of that before?
Not.
So Triple J is a radio station here in Australia, and there's a tradition that every year Australia is invited to vote for the best songs of the year.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And they basically have a day where they do the top 50 countdown, or the top 100 countdown, I should say. And people host parties for it, and people go wild in excitement. And so Gang of Youths often feature on that. But if I was to go more into my world, I think that like Australia has been able to break through the sort of archetype of the AC/DC best Aussie band and, you know, Men at Work, Crowded House, that kind of thing. And now we've got this new generation of heavy metal bands that are reaching the charts. And I don't just mean heavy metal charts, but like the overall music charts for the week, month, or year. In Australia, we have the ARIA charts, which is sort of, you know, equivalent to your Billboard or whatever. And so the heavy metal bands that are coming through as some of the biggest bands in the world at the moment is a band called Parkway Drive. They've made it so much that they're not only one of Australia's biggest exports, but they've become like a leader in the genre. And so what happened was Parkway Drive came through, and then a lot of other Aussie bands came out behind them and started knocking this metalcore genre out of the water, so that other like Americans, British and Europeans sort of describe Australian metalcore as some of the best in the world, which is always interesting to hear from our perspective being down under. But yeah, there's sort of this huge new wave of heavy metal happening in Australia.
Very cool.
So Ricky, there's a question I wanted to ask you, because you're part of, you know, media, journalist. Recently, another famous Aussie, Iggy Azalea, said that she is no longer retiring from music. She had famously, I guess, in pop culture said, because of the backlash and all the haters, that she was going to retire. She has now decided not to. You're sort of, I think, for maybe some musicians, maybe the enemy, as far as the journalist, you know, trying to get your way into their lives and get stories. Have you ever met with anyone that you got that kind of feeling of they viewed you as the enemy, and you had to really kind of let them know, like, hey, I'm here to celebrate what you do. I'm a fan of music, not trying to make you look bad or be sensational. Have you had any of that negative reaction of being part of, you know, the media?
I definitely have. And, you know, that's an interesting one with Iggy Azalea. I don't really have much to comment, just because I don't really know the story very well. It's not really in my realm of what I'd cover or what I'd listen to. But, you know, I think there are a lot of artists who, through their labels and contracts, are essentially contracted to do interviews, X amount of interviews for a campaign, whether it be for a new album, a tour, etc. And so they go into the record studio, or post-COVID days, they set up their Zoom like we're on today, and they kind of just sit through a series of interviews that they have to do, or they've agreed to do contractually. And, you know, more often than not, a lot of bands don't want to do interviews because of that very reason. They feel exposed. They know that everything they say could be spun in a certain direction, and it makes them feel a little bit more vulnerable. And I think there have been heavy metal bands who have done interviews and their story has been spun in the wrong way. And that's when the artist has to jump on social media and correct them. And maybe the damage is done already, because maybe, you know, fans are not going to read what that is, or maybe they've made up their minds. And so when I go into an interview, particularly one with a band that might have, you know, gone through some adversity recently, or may be feeling a little bit, you know, susceptible to what a journalist could spin a story into, I sort of just say straight up that I'm not looking to do that, whether or not they believe that or not. I'm just here to get like a nice, honest interview, where like the fans can hear a little bit more about your album or what you do. And sometimes I even ask up front, are there any topics that are off the table? Because I want an interview to be two-way. Like, I don't want it to be this sort of detective situation. Like, I want it to just be like what we're doing now, right? But I have been in that hot water before. I mean, there's a heavy metal band called Lamb of God. Have you heard of them before?
I have.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they're pretty big in the metal world, and there was an incident quite a few years ago where the frontman Randy Blythe was accused of manslaughter for a fan in the Czech Republic who was trying to get on stage, and there was a foot in the way and a barricade, and there's video footage, and it was a whole thing. And when Randy Blythe years later entered the Czech Republic again to tour, he got arrested at the airport and had to go through this trial around manslaughter.
Wow.
There's a huge documentary on it. It's actually really fascinating, really interesting, and all this kind of stuff, but I won't go into that. But around that time, they were releasing an album, and I got an interview with not the front man, but one of the other musicians, and we were talking about the album and all that kind of stuff. And I was a little bit younger, so maybe I was a little bit more naive, but I sort of asked, how's all the emotions of everyone in the band going with Randy going through all this stuff? What's that all like? And he sort of stopped for a minute and he said, man, like, this interview is about the new album. Like, these are our feelings, and you can't just come out here and ask us such personal stuff because it's not really your place. And I sort of thought, yeah, fair enough, mate. Like, who am I to ask you all this stuff? And who are you to try and have to like justify your emotions for the rest of the world? So yeah, it definitely happens.
Nice.
That's cool.
Thanks for that insight.
Yeah, that was really great insight. Speaking of interviews, since you said that, I've looked at like your website, or like what you have, a list of like your favorite interviews that you share. Give us your top 3 interviews that you've done. Who's been your favorite interviews? This time I want you not to be modest. Like, who were you most excited about interviewing? Who stayed up to that standard, kept that excitement, and who just blew it out of the water for you that was just like the best overall?
Wow, good question. So as much as I've talked to you about my brand as this deathcore connoisseur, I also really respect old school heavy metal.
Okay.
And like I said, I've got this bucket list, and like I look forward to interviewing certain bands and stuff like that. And I got to interview Tommy Lee of Motley Crue a couple of years ago.
Nice.
And it was for his solo album, and he's sort of a bit into EDM and stuff, but obviously he brings the drums and all that kind of stuff. He's the coolest guy in Hollywood, all that kind of thing. And, I was quite scared going into the interview, but I was also really, really excited. We've had Australian media interview him on the same album campaign, and they were told you're not allowed to ask about Pam Anderson at all. If you do, the interview will get cut, right? So this TV station were like, yeah, cool, no worries. And then lo and behold, they mentioned Pam, and it just dropped out.
Oh, wow.
And this is live television, right? I don't get it. So mine's all very like calculated. Anyway, to my point before, like around the Lamb of God example, I wasn't really interested in Pamela Anderson. And also the joke of it all is that there's no new information. Everyone knows everything there is to know about that stuff. So we just talked about the music, and he was so down to earth. And like, for Tommy Lee, who would not be able to walk in the street without getting asked for autographs and photos, for him to be so genuine, call me by name, and just have a chat to me was just really, really surreal. And I had like 2 minutes at the end, and I sort of said to him, Tommy, I got to let you go, but I just got to ask you one thing. Do you ever just hit the Sunset Strip every now and again, just for old time's sake? It's like, yeah, man, of course. I go there, get a slice of pizza, listen to some rock and roll, and it's all like the old days. And I'm like, this is like my rock and roll memoir right here. Like, this is the ideal. And then another one I had was you might know of the band called Korn. They're pretty big in the metal world. I got to interview Brian Head Welch, who was promoting his other band, Love and Death. And I got a Zoom interview with him. And one of the best things to come out of COVID is all these video interviews with bands. Yeah. Like, I didn't get to do all that before. It was all phone interviews, so you don't know what their facial expressions are. There's a bit of an audio delay and phone cards. Like, that's a real 90s thing, right? Phone cards. Anyway, so that was all done, and so we did this interview on Zoom, and I got the time difference wrong, and I was watching Korn videos on YouTube, and I was getting all pumped, and I had my Korn t-shirt on. Meanwhile, Brian Head Welch is waiting for me on Zoom, and I'm the one that didn't make it. I flaked out.
Wow.
Oh, no.
And like I'm like dreaming about nightmares like this happening, and the nightmare comes to life. And there's no guarantee you get another shot, right? Like
right.
I did get another shot, and we logged on at the right time. The time difference was all sorted, and I was asking him all about the band, and he was really, really lovely about it. And there are certain metal musicians that have a look about them that's really iconic, and for him it was dreadlocks and like tattooed eyelids. And you know, if you Google Brian Head Welch after this, you'll get a feel for what I mean. Is like really iconic to see on the same Zoom as you, to be chatting to him. And halfway through the interview, I had all these interview questions left to go, and he just stopped and he goes, "So what about you, Ricky? How long have you been doing this for?" And I was like, "What do you mean? You're asking me? You want to know about me? I'm nobody." And I was like, I became this little fan, and I was just like, "Oh, well, you know, like I do this on the side, and, you know, I have a day job and stuff." And he's just like, "Wow, that's really cool. So like you just do this on the side, it's a bit of a hobby." And I was just like, I've interviewed so many bands, from like the biggest in the world to like the smallest, like around the block kind of band. And he's one of the biggest, and he just wanted to know a little bit more about me. And that was cool. Just really surprising.
That's really cool. That is very cool.
So, yeah, those are probably like some big two, but like there've been heaps. I mean, I've had like Linkin Park, Foo Fighters, Aerosmith, Slipknot. Like I've been very, very lucky.
Nice. Whole gamut of genres. That's cool. That's really
Is
cool.
there one particular artist or band that, you know, maybe is one of the elder statesmen that, you know, like the clock is ticking, that you're like, I have to interview him. I have to interview that band before, you know, they're no longer here?
So for my editor at Wall of Sound, that is Tom DeLonge of Blink-182 / not yet back in Blink-182, but could be, watch this space. And for him, he's like, you know, I could quit all this after I interview that guy. And for me, it's Kirk Hammett of Metallica.
Oh, nice.
So it's very hard to get interviews because the brand Metallica does their own promotion. They don't need to do interviews. Yeah. They just appear and everyone's lapping it up. So, which is understandable to the heavy metal fan in the world, right? And so just interviewing Kirk Hammett is a challenge to get that situation happening. But if it was to happen, I would be really, really excited. But hopefully they don't get cancelled, because Stranger Things has brought them to the limelight. It's actually interesting you bring up right now.
I'll ask you about that.
There have been some TikTokers who are trying to cancel Metallica.
Oh, wow.
And like, these are heavy metal's good guys, man. Like, there are a lot of bad guys maybe out there, but like, you can't cancel Metallica, and like they're good guys.
Yeah. I think that there might be some residual resentment towards Lars for like the whole lawsuit with like his, you know, with their music and suing children. So I think that there's still,
that's what I don't like him for, is that.
Yeah, like there's some residual of that, of like the old rich guy like going after teenagers, like trying to download their music for free. But they are like the band, I think, for so many of us. Metallica, I'm like, my older brother, I think my dad at one point was like, I really like Metallica. So everyone loves Metallica. And I think if you were to go for one, you know, band member that is probably the coolest, that would probably be Kirk. Like, I would say Lars is like maybe the one that would be the hardest to maybe nail down and have a conversation with. I don't know. I don't want to, you know, say anything bad about Metallica because I am a fan, but you were talking about bands covering music or pop songs. One of the surprising things for me that I discovered a long time ago was that the Deftones were and are big fans of Depeche Mode. That's something that you wouldn't necessarily immediately think of when you think of the Deftones sound, that they're listening to Depeche Mode. If there was any favorite group of yours to cover a pop song, what would you really get a kick out of hearing? And why is it Kylie Minogue?
Well played. First of all, you actually remind me remarkably of Chino Marino from the Deftones. Have you heard that before?
I've heard that a lot, especially when I didn't have the full beard. It was just like the chin cube, and then the eyes, and yeah, everything. So yeah, I have gotten that quite often.
It's actually quite uncanny that you would bring up the Deftones like that.
Tattoos help too sometimes.
To answer your question, there's two things for me. One is that it's often so surprising and interesting when you find out that a heavy metal band actually listens to so many other music genres and is really inspired by other music genres that you would never even guess. It's just quite uncanny. And then it gets you listening to some of those things and you're like, I can hear that. Like that kind of works. And like, I can see why you would be inspired by that. In terms of that sort of death metal go karaoke thing, like, I think I'd have to stay patriotic and say that I'd love to hear Parkway Drive, who are probably Australia's biggest metal band at the moment, cover. Ooh, maybe it is Kylie Minogue on a night like this. Can you imagine that? Oh, Lord, dude. I could see it.
Nice. Yeah, I could see that too.
Yeah, I really enjoy.
And on the note of Kirk, if I get Kirk on an interview, I will come back on this podcast and talk about it.
Absolutely, we'd love that.
That sounds great. Yeah, let's make it happen. We'll channel all our energy towards you as well for that.
Absolutely.
So we are a pop culture podcast. We don't just focus on music. We talk about movies and comic books and other stuff like that. Let's talk a little bit about music, movies. What kind of movies? I know music is your passion. It's what you love. But what kind of movies do you enjoy? Is there a certain genre? I know my favorite genre is like going to be biopics of musicians. So like Elvis movie that came out, even like The Sound of Metal was a great movie. I enjoyed that one. So stuff with the musicians are just, I really love that storytelling. So what kind of movies do you enjoy?
I do love the odd biopic. Sometimes they're done exceptionally well and sometimes they're done really, really poorly. And often it's done poorly when the musician isn't involved in it. And, you know, there's this kind of thing around Hulu and Mike Tyson. That kind of thing happens a lot in the music world as well. But when it's not music related, I'm a sucker for stoner comedy. So the sort of Seth Rogen stuff, like, I don't know, man, like something about that era is just like, you know, it's just easy watching.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good way of putting it. Just easy watching. I like that.
But I feel like that wave of sort of Seth Rogen, James Franco, that duo and the stoner comedy sort of Pineapple Express era has kind of really wound down in a lot of ways. Do you think it has as well?
I think mainly because Seth Rogen grew up and James Franco almost got canceled.
Yes.
So yeah. I think Seth Rogen, he's taken on more roles. Well, I can't say that for sure because he's come back in more of his stoner type roles recently. But for a while he was doing more, I guess, less stoner, more grown up roles. And yeah, James Franco is actually in the hot topics right now as well, because he was just cast as Fidel Castro, which is kind of a weird casting. And so he's out in there in the limelight and everyone's trying to be against that, because I don't know how he can be seen as a Latino there. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess there's two reasons. That's probably the Latino thing of like, there's a lot of other Latino actors out there who should be given a chance to do something like this. And then I guess also the sort of troublesome situation James Franco has been in recently from a cancel culture point of view. So I can totally understand that. And in answer to my own question, maybe it's because they've grown up and I haven't.
Although I would love to see, like, I think for me, the answer would be that it's because superheroes and the MCU is just dominating movies right now. I'd love to see like a stoner superhero where they're like, you know, the bat signal goes off, but they're too high to go and like don't rescue anyone, or you know, they use the Batmobile to go get some food, like Taco Bell.
To make a Taco Bell run.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see that. I think that that's a genre that hasn't been explored, and it should.
Yeah, Yeah, like when there's an emergency for food after you've smoked too much weed, like the big M lights up on top of your roof and someone needs to just get you some fries and Big Macs fast, right?
Yeah, yeah. And somehow Cheech and Chong have to be involved. They have to be,
Yeah.
you know, the
Necessity.
yeah, yeah. So thank you so much for your time. I know we're running into a little bit of longer interview here. I want to let you know that I'm a huge fan of a lot of things Australian. I love reality shows from Australia. I like movies from Australia, music, etc. Um, there's a couple of movies in particular that I think of when I think of Australia, and I'm curious to see if they're as big as they are here. There, I guess they probably would be. Otherwise, we wouldn't know about them. But one of my favorites is Muriel's Wedding. Have you seen it? And is that a good representation of life in Australia?
So sometimes I'm really bad at pop culture because I'm so zeroed in on my heavy metal stuff. So
Yeah.
I feel like I've probably seen it, but like that reaction probably tells you that it's like, for me personally, not as like monumental as like other Aussie movies, but then like at the same time, like Australia's biggest export beer is called Foster's, and no one in Australia drinks Foster's. So sometimes things just take off overseas and they just don't take off here. But maybe Muriel's Wedding did take off here, and I'm just in the dark about it. I don't know.
It might be because you are too young. It's definitely, it was, if you know Toni Collette, the actress, it was her like first star making role.
Mm.
So she's a bit up there in age. So it's possible that maybe it didn't come out when you're, you know, watching movies. But one of my favorite movies, it kind of makes fun of like rural Australia. I think she's from a town in the film called Porpoise Spit. And it's a really funny movie. If you haven't seen it, any of our listeners that want to watch a funny Australian movie, I recommend that. But do you have any movies that you associate with Australia?
The Man Who Died with a Falafel in His Hand.
I've not heard of that.
The Man Who Died with a Falafel in his hand. Oh, I like the title.
Great movie. Highly recommend. There's heaps of Aussie movies out there. I'm definitely not the movie buff to be asking about these things, but that one is a great one. And it probably aligns with my stoner comedy mindset as well.
Nice.
But I had a question for you guys, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I came on this show, or I guess when you asked me to come on this show, I sort of thought to myself, you know, what is it about certain generations that is interesting in terms of like the differences and that kind of thing? And there's a lot of memes out there that joke about how, like, you know, oh, the 90s was so many decades ago. And when you realize that 1980 was, you know, almost 50 years ago, whatever, that kind of thing. I find that it's really interesting that we talk about the 80s and the 90s so much. And we're already in 2022, and no one really talks about, oh, the music of the noughties, what a time. Or how about those movies in the 10s? They were brilliant. So what's happening? When are we going to catch up to that? And why isn't it happening yet, in your point of view?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a really rough, hard question to ask, because I feel like I will turn into the old man that's like condemning pop culture and young people. But I think that how do I phrase this without being too insulting? But you see it with the emergence of reality TV, and everything is so contrived now. You have like the cult of personality more so than any other previous decades. The Kardashians, and you know, I mentioned reality shows, which I'm actually a big fan of, but everything is, you know, TikTok ready, Instagram ready. Whereas in the 90s, for me, it was all about alternative music, and they were not worried about the way they were looking. They were worried about their message, their music. You know, a lot of them were doing drugs, a lot of them were heroin addicts, but you didn't have people that were all glammed up and filtered and faces contoured for mass production. And so I think that people really admire people that are sincere and are real. And people, even young people right now, I think are going back to the 90s, realizing that those artists were really sincere, that their music was real, and that their message was real. It wasn't, not everyone, because there were pop stars at that time that were packaged and manufactured, but bands like Nirvana, Stone Temple Pilots, I laundry list of Pearl Jam, etc., that they just had an authenticity that we're missing in music right now. And that's for me. But what do you think, Danny?
I think, well, in the music side, for me, it's like you get bands, like you said, in the 90s, Soundgarden, and they usually had one or two writers, right, on the lyrics. And now you get the bands in the 2000s, 2010s, where you might have 15 different writers on one track. And it's like, it loses, I think, that personal sense, like you said, the authenticity of it. And personally, I think maybe I might have just been like skipped over that whole decade. And I went from like 99 to like maybe pick back up in 2015. I don't know the exact range, but you're right. It's like it's like a bubble that everyone just seems to scoot right around. You're absolutely right. And maybe it's nothing significant was in that time frame. I don't know. I need to go back and revisit it. Maybe when we get a few years down the line, we'll look back and say, you know what, there was really some good stuff that came out of that time era that we're just, the other stuff is just so much better that it maybe pushes that stuff down.
Yeah, that's interesting perspective. I mean, like, if I think about the early 2000s, I think like hip hop would have a lot to say. Like there's a lot going on there.
That's true.
I think in the heavy metal world, we're having a revival of some of the early 2010s for bands that disappeared from 2015 to 2020. So like that's big in our world. But, I'm sure in pop culture, like there's a lot that's happened between 2000 and 2020, but maybe we need time since then to reflect and realize it.
Yeah. I think it's a weird, you're right. It is weird and strange occurrence, because it seems like, for me, like nothing happened in that time. It's just like this gray area that is, maybe it's the unknown, the unexplored, and something that we can dive into. We can do some like episodes on that. What happened in the year 2010 or something, just take a look at what the top songs were and movies and whatnot.
It'd be interesting. Like, it's just, I don't know. Just personally, I found it interesting that like no one talks about 2000s, 2000s.
You're right. You're right. I mean, I don't know. A lot of boy bands came out in the 2000s, early 2000s, right? So those are, I think, heavily dominant, like Backstreet Boys, NSYNC. I think that the manufactured, like Gabe said, for high consumerism was right in that era, I feel.
Yeah. I hopefully, hopefully that time period is like the middle child. The 90s was like the first child, and now we're going to get the baby that's going to, the creative genius is going to come out. There's hopefully, I mean, that's what maybe will make me less, depressed, is knowing that maybe things are going to get better. I think though that these times being so politically insane typically inspire people to make great art and great music. True. So the one positive lining of all this insanity that's going on right now is that there's going to be, there's going to be more amazing art, because people are going to have to, channel that into something. And so hopefully, I know that there's going to be some great music, movies, comics, all of that is going to happen because of all of this insanity going on.
That is so true. I was interviewing a band called Silent Planet. They're a metalcore band from California, and they had a new album. I think it was last year that I interviewed them. It must have been, or the year before even. And I was talking about the album process. There were some deep lyrics in there and stuff. And he said, our recording studio was on a main street where there were Black Lives Matter protests going on, like downstairs from where we were going. And so like that sort of environment to be writing and recording music, and this particular musician was a part of the protest as well. And then you listen to the album and it's sort of just like, you're right, how much of current political events are really being channeled into art, and how are we going to reflect on that in the next 5 or 10 years? It's going to be really interesting.
I think you hit on something there, Gabe. I think 2000 to 2010, maybe the world was at peace, and we were, so there wasn't really that much tension to write more, get creative about. I don't know. I think you're onto something there, though.
Yeah, I think that I wasn't at peace. We had George W. Bush.
That's true. That's true. For the first
there was definitely
2005 and on, maybe.
Like, I don't want anyone to like repaint history or anything. But I think that
things, the 2000s. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, but I think that for so many people right now, it's just pandemic with monkeypox, with Trump, with I mean, there's a laundry list of things that are going on in the world that you feel prisoner almost in your home. Those creative people tend to really it inspires them to do some great things. So I hope to see that very soon. I am wondering, you mentioned interviewing bands from Southern California. Have you been to the States? Have you been to California or any of the states here in the US?
I have been to the US a couple of times, including San Diego, and it reminded me the most of Australia.
Oh, really?
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found like the beaches and the sunshine. It was just like, it reminded me a lot of home, but like in a very American way. And I really loved that. But yeah, like I guess when I went to LA, like my priority was to make sure that I went to the Sunset Strip. And, I went to like a Slipknot live premiere where the band were doing a Q&A. And so like, I was really Hollywoodified, like, but not in a classic way, but in a rock and roll kind of way.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It's interesting to, as a fan of music, to like go down to like Sunset and see a lot of the clubs and the bands. I'm very fortunate that it's a weird, so let me back up a bit. It's a bit weird, like growing up and having these iconic bands be so romanticized in my head. I'm from Arizona originally, so I always had these fantasies of LA and like Guns N' Roses on the Strip or like the Doors in LA. And both of my parents are from Los Angeles and would go see those bands play before they were really anybody. And it's they're so lucky that I like, sometimes you just talk to them and it's like, oh yeah, I saw, my dad hung out and smoked with Miles Davis in a club in San Francisco. And I think, do I have that opportunity? Like who is going to be the next icon or the great musical genius that I'm going to go see live? And I always kind of think of, whenever I think of LA, I think about that. Like my parents were young and like hanging out with like these historic, rockers. And it's so crazy to me. Like, I don't know. It blows my mind that, my parents were cool and
But to your point, maybe you'll go to the local pub and watch a band that are nobodies and you'll get their signatures or autographs. And in 20 years, they'll be the world's biggest rock band. And you'll be telling your kids, yeah, I went to see that band at the pub in San Diego the other night. Oh, not the other night, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I hope so. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe. What else was I thinking about? Yeah, I think like I went to the Sunset Strip in LA and I was that naive Australian that was expecting the street party of the 70s and 80s. And it was just kind of like a highway. And I was like, but then like I dug deeper. So there was actually an Australian death metal band playing at the Whiskey. And I went there and I really got into it. And I tried to imagine what it would be like with like an 80s metal band. And then I went to the Rainbow and sort of saw the tribute to Lemmy from Motorhead. So whilst like I didn't get the pulse racing as soon as I arrived, you got to really immerse yourself in it and sort of use your imagination a bit, and then you get to have the fun that you had hoped for.
Yeah, I think I hear that often when people come to Los Angeles, that they have this notion of what it's going to be like, and then they're like, oh, it's not. but like people that grew up around LA or in LA, they're like, yeah, it's a little bit grittier, a little bit more seedier. It's not like Marilyn Monroe working at Walgreens getting discovered anymore, and a lot of more drug addicts, but it's still really cool, and there's still like a really great music scene. My niece is in a band, and she played the Troubadour, which is another famous like icon of venues. And so there's still some really great places in Southern California where great music is being played. So that's cool. That's awesome. You're able to come down.
Definitely. And like, you can always rely on Ron Jeremy to shake your hand at the Rainbow if that's something you're interested in. I mean, the guy's reliable, but I would prefer Jeremy to Motorhead, but he's not alive anymore. So what can you do?
Yeah, I think Ron Jeremy is in jail now, right?
Oh, really?
I think that I don't want to put, false news into, but I think he got accused of messing around with kids and he might be in jail.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. Which is kind of like a weird, like, a guy that has had sex with probably hundreds of women and, I don't know. It's just kind of a weird subject, not to bring this topic down, but
way to bring it down.
That's really interesting. But then, like, we talked about cancel culture earlier, and it comes up again. And it's very real. Like we've got to listen to some of these stories coming out and respond to them. So
what is a famous quote of like, never meet your heroes because they'll always disappoint you. I mean, sometimes maybe it's better that you don't meet those people that are, those
it's
icons.
True.
Yeah.
I reckon sometimes don't meet your heroes, but sometimes you should.
Oh yeah, for sure. Sometimes you need to buy them a drink and like talk shit at the bar and hang out. One of the things that I just right now occurred to me is that there's not a lot of female-led like metal or heavy sounding bands. Do you think, what are your thoughts about that? Are you fans of any of the groups that do have female lead singers, or is it just that the genre is not popular with women, or what's the deal with that?
So the dynamic is changing a lot. The heavy metal world used to be your classic, long-haired metal dudes only kind of thing, and maybe the odd female, but that has changed a lot over the last few years, or maybe many years. And so now, I go to a show, a heavy metal show, and I actually reckon it's more of a 50-50 split of punters, of male and female. And I think that women have undergone some adversity in trying to front heavy metal bands or even be included in heavy metal bands and being accepted. But that changed and got flipped on its head really, really fast when the community came together and was sort of like, we're not going to talk about female fronted bands anymore. We're just going to talk about bands. And what we're going to make sure of is that our festivals are inclusive. So we had an Aussie music festival a few years ago that was called out to not have enough women or any women on the lineup. And even if statistically there may be less women in metal than there are men, there is a necessity to make sure that we're inclusive. And so that's happening more and more and more. And it's interesting that organically we're seeing more and more women be interested in fronting heavy metal bands and just being involved in heavy metal music. And it's pretty awesome. I think, traditionally it was probably a bit more of a boys' world, or, whatever you want to call it. But I think that that's definitely changed in a big way. And for the better, because you actually get to hear a little bit more diversity in the heavy metal that comes out. But also, interestingly, you'd be surprised the kind of like vocal noises that some of the female front metalheads can bring out. It is the most awesome thing ever. Challenge for you to check out a band called Spirit Box. After this, American band who are like rising to the top.
Nice. One of the another Australian performer singer that I really like, the band Distillers. Do you know them? With
I don't know the Distillers.
Lead singer is Brody. I believe her last name is pronounced Dale. I think at one point she was romantically linked with Josh Homme of Queens of the Stone Age. But very cool punk metal band. Really, like, I don't know, she's just like a tough chick that led a really cool punk band. I think that some of the melodies I'm attracted to when women are singing. Like you said, they have a different sound that is just very pleasing to hear. But yeah, one of my favorite groups that I think they've broken up. She did a solo. I think she's had 1 or 2 solo albums. But Distillers is definitely a really cool band that is led by an Australian.
That's a cool one. I'm gonna have to check them out. And while you were saying that, I was thinking of this, like in Sweden or Scandinavia, like melodic death metal and just general death metal is really popular. And there was one band called Arch Enemy, which is very female oriented, and they're just the most brutal heavy metal band. And they're awesome. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I'll have to check them out.
Sounds cool. Well, I think, Ricky, I won't take up much more of your time. I know you're gracing us with your time because I think you're on your lunch break or something right now. So we appreciate you coming on the PopCultX. We appreciate your insight. We look forward to seeing your interview with Kirk from Metallica and hearing that as soon as it happens, because we're going to manifest it for you. So thank you again, Ricky. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you coming on PopCultX.
Thanks so much for the time, boys. Looking forward to catching up again soon.
Absolutely.
Have a great rest of your week in the future there.
Cheers. See ya.
Bye.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was basically how I got in touch with Ricky from Wall of Sound. It went from the Interrupters to that article to what you guys just heard and listened to. So thank you again, Ricky from Wall of Sound. We appreciate all your time, and we appreciate you spending some time with us. It was a really great conversation.
Yeah, really cool guy. I think you'd be really hard pressed to meet an Australian that's not cool or not friendly. Australians just seem to be like the most friendly people ever. I could be wrong. I don't know. Russell Crowe, maybe not. But really cool guy. I really enjoyed the conversation. A lot of cool recommendations. I'm really excited to go back and listen to like some of my favorite like hard rock bands. We haven't really talked about hard music.
No, we haven't.
PopCultX. But I definitely am a big fan of some hard rock, System of a Down being one of them, the Deftones, one of the bands that I mentioned that is led by an Australian artist, the Distillers led by Brody Dale, is really cool, like one of my favorite bands. So I'm definitely going to go back and revisit some of the albums that I have and rock out tonight, I guess.
Sounds like a plan. Yeah. I mean, my heavy metal, like I said, is more of the 80s, big hair, and also Rammstein, System of a Down, like you said. And yeah, why not make it a concert tonight?
So, I mean, that wraps up like our little chat with Ricky, which is really cool. Like, I definitely look forward to inviting other people that have, interests outside of our little bubble. I think that we're so similar that it's nice to get someone that listens to something completely different than what we listen to or that what we watch, and then especially from someone on the other side of the world. Exactly. Is really cool. So if you happen to be listening to this particular podcast or watching us on YouTube, and you're in somewhere really cool and you have some cool opinions, please hit us up. We would be more than happy to welcome you on the show. If you disagree with us, if you don't like us, whatever, bring it. We'll have a conversation. So hit us up. We're both on Twitter. We're both on our YouTube channel. So we're very easy to get a hold of. And we'll also be adding Ricky's links to some of his articles that he's published that are really great, and where you can follow him and find his work in Australia and all over the world.
Definitely. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, for sharing, liking, commenting. Part of the conversation, like Gabe said, and come on the show. We'll have a nice little conversation like you just saw, and we look forward to it. So thanks everyone again. PopCultX.
See ya.